The majority of breast cancer related queries we get are not for people who have had breast cancer. It's people who have breast cancer in their family history. So perhaps their sister or their mother has had breast cancer and they come to us because they're concerned about potentially going through the same thing themselves and they want to have that cover.
If the mother is under 40, yeah.
The mother was under 40, yeah.
Regardless of how old you are when you're applying,
yeah.
Insurers will say that's really young. We're going to exclude it on trauma, and then potentially, charge you more for the TPD and income protection. Yeah,
that's right, exactly. Now, if your mum was a lot older, so if she was over 50 when she was diagnosed, they might say that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got an increased likelihood of claim. It could be age-related potentially. So in that case, you're more likely to not have an exclusion. Every insurer is different. Like, as you know, Phil, there's a couple of insurers that we find to be most generous when it comes to breast cancer family history. So we veer towards recommending them for most of the women that come through that have that in their family history.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Every insurer will have their own risk assessment that they've decided. And so that's why it's super important to go through a financial advisor when you get insurance. It's super important to go through a specialist who does a deep dive on your health first to then determine what insurance company are we going to recommend. Hey there, so today we're doing another deep dive on women's health conditions and its impact on insurance. So today we've got Azari Bell, one of our advisors.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Thanks for joining me. So I'm going to be interviewing you, asking you a million questions about health conditions. So we're actually going to do this video over multiple videos. We're going to be discussing endometriosis, breast cancer, cervical cancer, pregnancy complications, postpartum depression, anxiety. We're going to be talking about low iron and the impact on insurance, and PCOS. Now, what's PCOS stand for?
Polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Yes. Let's.
There may be some mispronunciations.
We are going to butcher all the medical terms, but we're gonna talk about its impact on insurance because that's what we know.
That's what we know about.
We are not medical experts. So let's start off. We talk about insurance. So let's just set the scene. What insurances are we talking about?
So we're not talking about things like health insurance. That's kind of a different topic. We're talking about personal insurances. So the four main ones that we're talking about are life insurance, which pays out if you pass away, TPD, which pays out if you're totally and permanently disabled. We're also looking at income protection, so if you can't work because of your health, making sure you're still receiving an income, and trauma insurance, which is a type of insurance that pays out for diagnosis of certain serious illnesses. So that's it's more specific to your health, and that's what we're going to be focusing on.
Yeah, cool. And talk to me, why do we need insurance?
So we need insurance because it is ultimately what can help you remain financially dependent if your health fails you. So you know what I love to say, Phil? A man is not a financial plan.
Yeah, that's right.
Nor is any individual for that matter. We can ultimately really only really count on ourselves in some situations. So just, making sure that if things go wrong health-wise, that's completely out of your control. But the one thing you can control to a degree is, your financial situation. That's where these insurances can really help with that.
That's right. And even though, in my family situation, I'm married and, we are both financially dependent on each other.
Yes.
Even though Kate's not doing paid work at the moment, incredibly important to the household. So even though I am earning the income for the household, we have insurance for Kate because it's incredibly important that the things that we're going to talk about have a massive impact on the household.
Yeah.
And so even if you do have a man for the financial plan, it's incredibly important for the household to make sure you protect the downside when it comes to insurance.
Yeah.
And so, it's super important. So now we're going to be talking about the impact on insurance. So all of these health conditions may lead to certain things like exclusions, loadings, declining of cover. We're going to talk about underwriting. So let's just set the scene in terms of what are all these insurance jargon? What do they actually mean? So talk to me about an exclusion. What does that mean?
So an exclusion essentially means that if this is a pre-existing condition of yours and the insurance underwriter has assessed that maybe you're at a higher risk of claiming on that condition, they'll exclude it, meaning they won't cover you if you were to claim on that specific condition. So you'd still be covered under other health issues, but just not that specific one.
Yeah, cool. And then loadings. What is a loading?
Yeah, so a loading will usually mean that they'll still cover you for that condition, but they're going to charge you a higher premium on your insurances to account for that increased risk.
Yep, cool. And why will an insurance company do an exclusion or a loading? Can you have something that, they've said, I'll load it, and you can say, actually, can you just give me an exclusion, or the other way around?
Unfortunately not. So it's usually up to the determination of the insurance underwriter as to whether they're going to exclude it or load it. It's not something that you usually have a choice on. Sometimes they will for certain things. So completely unrelated to what we're talking about, but football. We have a lot of clients who play football competitively, and sometimes the insurer will say, okay, we can either exclude football or we can just charge you a loading or whatever.
Yeah, and there, I mean, to what we're going to talk about later, breast cancer has very specific insurers, have very specific rules where if you have family history of breast cancer, you can choose one or the other, but that's generally pretty rare. Normally the insurance company will have a viewpoint, we only exclude or we only load for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then declining of cover. So what does that mean, a decline?
Yeah, so if someone were to get a decline, it would mean that their health history is perhaps more complex or higher risk than what the insurer is willing to take on. So a decline might not necessarily mean you can't get any insurance. It might often mean that they can't offer you TPD or income protection cover, but they could look at life and trauma insurance. So it is pretty rare that someone would be declined for everything. And a decline isn't the end of the world, really. That's one question I do get asked a lot, is what does it mean if I get declined? It doesn't mean that you've got a black mark on your record that, no insurer is ever going to want to cover you again. It just essentially means that if you were to make a future insurance application, that insurer is just going to want to know, why were you declined previously? Are there some medical conditions that maybe you haven't mentioned to us that we should know about?
Yeah, exactly. And there are some funny rules when it comes to insurance, like the rules where if you have more than 3 exclusions, then they will knock you out, and no insurer in Australia will offer cover.
Yeah.
And so you could have like a sore ankle that you just twisted your ankle the day before you applied for the cover, so you get an exclusion for that, even though in 3 months' time they won't have an exclusion if it's fully healed. You may have like a sore back and a back issue. You may have a sore neck and get maybe separate exclusions for them. Could be one full spine exclusion. Sore elbow. So you may have these little niggles that all count to 4 exclusions, and you get declined cover. So it may not be like this significant, you're on your deathbed that they decline. You may just have these funny things where in that point in time when you applied, you got declined. But, when you're going through a financial advisor, they'll be able to talk to the expectation of what it would look like in the future.
Exactly. You can be a very healthy person and still, unfortunately, have some insurances decline. But as you say, most things, a lot of times those things can be temporary.
Yeah. Now talk to me about underwriting. What is underwriting?
Yes. So underwriting is essentially where what we'd get you to do is we'd get you to fill out a form, get a bunch of information about your medical history, your financial situation, all that kind of thing. Then it goes to an insurance company and they employ underwriters where their job is just to essentially assess the risk of your application and your medical history and determine what they're comfortable taking on, what they'd need to exclude and load and all of that kind of thing. That's essentially what underwriting is.
Yeah, cool. And then when it comes to insurance also, the other thing is, so we're going to be talking about the conditions and the impact on insurance. And there's a lot of people say, well, are they discriminating against me because I've had this health issue? The thing about insurance is they're allowed to discriminate. That's their job. And by discrimination, I mean that they look at the risk of a claim and they will price in that risk, or they will manage that risk of their business. So we all kind of understand that when we all got our first car when we were 18, and the insurance premiums for our car insurance was much more expensive because 18-year-olds, less experienced driving, potentially doing some stupid stuff. I remember when I was 18, I was doing some very stupid things. Not on public roads for sure, but I was doing a lot of those in non-public roads. And so, and it's priced more. So you get charged a lot more as an 18-year-old getting car insurance than you do as a 35-year-old.
Yeah.
And then as you get older again, the price might go up because of the risk factors. When you get house insurance, if you live in a less safe suburb, the premiums will be higher. Yeah. If you live in, an incredibly safe suburb where the crime rate's really low, the premiums will be lower. Or if you're in a, fire zone, like all of these things, we understand insurance companies will price in the risk. It's the exact same thing when it comes to health, our personal health history.
And I understand, Phil, that life insurers have an exemption under the Discrimination Act. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, all insurers, like the way it is as long as they have data to prove why they should put an exclusion or a loading or a decline, then they can make that assessment. So they can't just say, oh, Azaria, you looked at me a bit funny, so I'm going to put an exclusion on you because I just don't like you. They've got to have some data as to why endometriosis has led to higher claims rates. Therefore, we may put an exclusion on or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, perfect.
So a great example is family history, actually, of cancer. Family history of cancer, statistically says that you're more likely to have cancer as a child if you've got it in the family, because it's hereditary, or can be hereditary. So therefore that risk is greater. Therefore, we will consider that when it comes to insurance applications.
Yeah. Perfect.
So let's start on endometriosis.
Okay.
So what is it?
So, according to the World Health Organization, the endometriosis is a disease in which the tissue similar to the lining of the uterus grows outside of the uterus. So this can be very painful, especially around your period, and it can also make it harder to get pregnant in some cases as well. So generally you'll see that around the pelvis, but I have a very close friend who has quite a bad case of endometriosis, and it can spread kind of all over. So your bowel, your bladder, a bunch of different areas, and it can be extremely painful. So a few interesting things about endometriosis. Really, the only way currently to diagnose it is to actually go under a surgery where they can check to see if there is endometriosis there. And there's not a whole lot of treatment options available either, unfortunately. It's probably a bit under-researched at the moment, especially for how common it is.
Yeah, okay. So how common is it?
So they're saying at the moment approximately 1 in 9 women have endometriosis, but there is a suspicion that it's higher. I know for myself growing up, I was always told periods are painful. It's meant to be painful, and it's only until recently, with a bit more research coming out, that it really shouldn't be that painful. Maybe some pain or discomfort on the first day of your period is quite normal, but if you're having extreme pain for multiple days, maybe that's actually something like endometriosis. That's not kind of what we should be experiencing normally.
Yeah, I've been married for a long time, but now I've got daughters who are about to who are going through that experience of starting that world, and so I'm all in that world now. And I won't talk about our conversations at home on recording because my daughters will be mortified if I do. But let's keep moving on. So how does can you take insurance out if you've got endometriosis?
Yeah, absolutely. So most cases you can. We have a lot of women coming to us who have endo, and there is a lot of concern that will leave them unable to get insurance because it is a big part of their life. It's something that they suffer with a lot and something that they don't really have a cure for. But absolutely, we help a lot of women with endometriosis get insurance, and the way that's treated can vary.
Yeah. And so talk to me about exclusions. So do insurance companies, they say, all good, you got endometriosis, doesn't matter. Do they put an exclusion on? Do they load it? Do they decline? What is the common outcomes?
Yeah, so it does vary quite a lot. I've got some examples actually that I've written down. Before we had this video recording, I just went through some of our recent cases of clients who have endometriosis to get an idea of the kind of spectrum of outcomes that can occur. So for one example, for someone who has endometriosis and ended up getting an exclusion, they had some pelvic pain. The symptoms, they only occurred sometimes, but they're on medication. So they're trialing some medication to see how that might help. And they're also having ongoing reviews with a gynecologist to manage that. So that one ended up with an exclusion. I think probably from the insurer's point of view, this is kind of still a dynamic kind of issue. Things might change, treatment might change, medication might change. So we're going to exclude that one.
Yep.
Another example, this one also had an exclusion. So this person had the surgery in June 2024. They don't get the pain anymore. They experienced the pain last around that time. In that case, the client got an exclusion, but the insurer actually said, hey, in 12 months, we'd be happy to review this. It looks like things are improving. You haven't had symptoms for quite a while. If that's still the case in 12 months' time, we might be happy to take off that exclusion. Other insurers in similar positions said that they'd be happy to review that in 3 months' time. So again, an exclusion isn't always, a life sentence. That can change.
Yeah. And, we're recording this early 2025. So because the surgery was quite recent and the insurer just wants a bit of time to determine, hey, has it been resolved, completely resolved? If it has been, in 12 months' time, if there are no pain, no symptoms, no issues, then we can kind of safely say we're kind of like a year and a half away from surgery. It did its job. We're comfortable with the risk, so we can remove that exclusion then.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right.
And, talking about this stuff, it's not a diagnosis of endometriosis. You can actually not be diagnosed and potentially have some, issues when it comes to underwriting in terms of exclusions. And you can have endometriosis with a diagnosis and still get standard rates. So talk about this next example.
Yeah, definitely. So we had a client who was experiencing moderate pain, taking a painkiller. She was still able to work. The specialist advised her to have an IUD inserted, and that actually really helped. No more symptoms. That was completely resolved. So although she had been diagnosed with endometriosis, the insurer said we can put that through without any exclusions. We're not concerned that this is going to majorly impact your life in the future given how well your body's responded to that.
Yeah. And it's really important to know when it comes to insurance that it's not a diagnosis or not, as I was saying. It's actually about the symptoms and treatment. So if you're responding really well to a treatment plan and your body's responding really well to it, then the insurance companies can reasonably expect for the long-term future it's going to be okay. And we know that the risk of a claim is much lower because these insurance policies that we're setting up. So one of the reasons why they are very harsh, like, you know, putting like someone, what are we talking about? Surgery 9 months ago, not much pain since, but still putting an exclusion on. The reason they're doing that is because these contracts are signed today and the insurance company can never change their mind in the future. So if the treatment plan for like that second example that we went through, if the treatment plan started to get worse and the symptoms came back and we need to do something, you know, more drastic, the insurance company doesn't have any scope or any mechanism to get that, to then go, actually, we made a mistake back there. Let's change our mind. As long as everything's fully disclosed and the insurance company's got all the information to make that determination, they have one chance. So that's why they lean towards putting an exclusion on when otherwise your GP or your specialist will come and say, you should be fine. Like we'd have no expectation of it being worse in the future. So that's why sometimes like doctors will tell their clients that the insurance companies are wrong, which is fair enough. They know their clients' situation best, but it's because doctors can do further treatment if it does get worse, and they can intervene if they need to. But the insurance company, they've got no options for that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
So can we get declined for endometriosis?
Can happen. It's not very common. The cases in which someone might be declined for endometriosis is if they're taking significant amounts of time off work. So if the condition is really brutal, they are really struggling to go to work, that often can lead to a decline of something like income protection or TPD cover, which are largely based on your ability to work. Another thing is if you've got a surgery upcoming, sometimes the insurers will say, hey, let's just wait to see how that goes. Obviously, the chance is very, very small of this happening, but insurers will often decline cover if there's an upcoming surgery, because if they were to find that it's not actually endometriosis, it's actually something more sinister, then exactly as you said, Phil, once they've made that decision to offer cover, they can't take it back. So they often will say, okay, look, we probably can offer the cover. We'll just need to wait until you've had that surgery and you've recovered and you're back at work.
Yeah, and insurance companies can be unreasonable in terms of like the way in which we view their assessments. But at the end of the day, they're the ones paying out the money if we ever need to claim. And so they often don't decline if there's an upcoming, like technically decline. They just say, we're going to have to delay our assessment. Now, it's effectively a decline.
Yeah.
It acts and it looks and smells like a decline, so it's a decline. But it's basically they're just saying, hey, we're going to need that surgery done and dusted, and then we can make an assessment. And likely it's like, as we had with that other client, we need the surgery done, and then we'll just put an exclusion until we know there's a long time of it being fully treated.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
All right. So what can you do if you've got endometriosis? If you, or even, you just, pain, period pain, severe period pain, and, may not have a diagnosis. What do we do about it?
So I would just say reach out to an insurance advisor. What we can do, which can be of a big benefit, is we can do medical pre-assessments, so we can get kind of what's the situation on your endometriosis. We can go to the different insurance companies and say, hey, this is our client anonymously. If they were to apply for insurance with your company, what would that look like? So we can get an idea of the different insurers, how they would treat that, and we can kind of guide you accordingly, as opposed to just going direct to one insurance company, lodging an application and hoping for the best. We can probably try to rule out some of the less favourable insurers in that process.
Yeah, that's right. And as advisors, we know everyone's financial situation. We know everyone's deepest, darkest health secrets. So, we take our jobs very seriously, and we ask a lot of questions. So if you are going to an advisor, my advice is to go to one that will spend a lot of time understanding your health situation, because as we said, it's not just a diagnosis. That matters much less than what are your symptoms as an individual. Like, how are you reacting to this, endometriosis? Are you taking time off work? Are you not? Like, what does that actually look like? So really diving deep with the advisor on understanding that, so then we can take it to the underwriter and say, here's this client's situation. Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about period pain. So can you claim on income protection if I have severe period pain?
So, tricky question. Technically, there's no mechanism for insurers to say we're not covering you for period pain. That's not the case at all. Anything health-wise that leaves you unable to work, you can generally claim on unless it's excluded. What you'd probably find, though, is you probably wouldn't get to the point of claiming on period pain. So let's say, for example, you need to take time off work because you've got really bad cramps or whatever it might be associated with your period. One thing that people will often forget is that for income protection insurance, you've got a waiting period, and that's the amount of time that you need to be off work before you're eligible to kind of start claiming. So the shortest waiting period most people would have is probably 30 days. The chance that you're going to have that period pain for longer than 30 consecutive days is pretty low, so you probably wouldn't get to the point of needing to claim on your income protection. You'd probably be more relying on sick leave, annual leave, and things like that. Yeah,
and look, like, I've got a lot of empathy for women going through period pain, but have you had man flu? That's even worse. And you can't claim on man flu, so you can't claim on period pain.
No, totally. Yeah, like much empathy for what you must be going through.
Just kidding. All right, let's move on. Okay. Let's talk about cancers. So the two main ones, breast cancer and cervical cancer. Yeah. So start off, what is breast cancer?
Yeah, so breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed cancer among women in Australia. So they say approximately 1 in 7 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime, and that's according to the Breast Cancer Network in Australia. And in 2023, over 20,000 people, men and women, were diagnosed with breast cancer. So it is a major concern, and it's something that we deal with a lot with our clients.
Yeah. So, and talk to me about, we talked high level about these insurance, but breast cancer, what types of insurance policies could be claimed on under a breast cancer?
Yeah, so, I mean, in theory, it could be all. So income protection insurance, if you can't work because you're undergoing treatment for your breast cancer, you could be claiming on that one. Trauma insurance is probably the biggest one. So trauma insurance pays out for diagnosis of serious illness, and that's primarily things like cancer, heart attack, and stroke. So breast cancer is a big cause for trauma claims. Life insurance, of course, as well. If someone were to pass away or be diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, you could be looking at that. Total and permanent disability cover, probably a bit less common, but it is potential. If you couldn't ever work.
The treatment plan left you severely disabled off the back of it, then there may be total permanent disability payment. Most common is that trauma.
Exactly.
Like you basically trigger a trauma payment straight away on that, and that's just a lump sum that gets paid in your bank account, and so you just know that we've got the money there. We can take time off work. We can not worry about the financial impact of this horrendous scenario, and then income protection as well, which pays you that ongoing income.
Yes.
And then obviously, if it leads to a life insurance payment, then there's obviously that as well. So,
well, on that, Phil, you had a client, I think a few years ago, a young woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer. What happened there?
Yeah. She had breast cancer. She got a payment. The old income protection contracts actually paid her 6 months of income protection upfront as well. So it was both the trauma policy and the income protection policy. She took time off work, and she actually went through treatment, and she went back to work by choice as well, because a lot of people's workplace is their community, is their support network. So she was physically able to, and mentally it was important to her to go back part-time during that time. And she's fully recovered. She had family in New Zealand, so she'd come to Australia from New Zealand, so she was able to have her family come over, have her parents come over and help just support her during that time as well. And that's really what that payment is yes, there's medical bills, potentially not huge amount of medical bills depending on the situation you're in, but it's really just that financial security to go, you know what, I feel like I need my parents here. Let's follow them over. Let's house them. Let's just build that network around me because we can financially, afford it.
Absolutely. Yep, definitely.
So talk to me about exclusions when it comes to insurance applications regarding breast cancer.
Yeah, so the majority of breast cancer related queries we get are not for people who have had breast cancer. It's people who have breast cancer in their family history. So perhaps their sister or their mother has had breast cancer and they come to us because they're concerned about potentially going through the same thing themselves and they want to have that cover. Now, the difficulty there is that in terms of having a breast cancer exclusion, family history is probably the biggest factor there. So if you do have that family history, you are more likely to be excluded for breast cancer. So just as an example, it really depends on your age when you're applying for the cover and how old usually your mother was when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, if that is the case. So if you, for example, if you are under 40 when you're applying for cover, most insurers will exclude breast cancer on trauma insurance.
So that's the mother. If the mother is under 40,
the mother was under 40,
regardless of how old you are when you're applying, insurers will say that's really young. We're going to exclude it on trauma, and then potentially charge you more for the the TPD and income protection.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Now, if your mum was a lot older, so if she was over 50 when she was diagnosed, they might say that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got an increased likelihood of claim. It could be age-related potentially. So in that case, you're more likely to not have an exclusion. Every insurer is different. Like, as you know, Phil, there's a couple of insurers that we find to be most generous when it comes to breast cancer family history. So we veer towards recommending them for most of the women that come through that have that in their family history.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Every insurer will have their own risk assessment that they've decided. And so, some insurers... And so that's why, it's super important to go through a financial advisor when you get insurance. It's super important to go through a specialist who does a deep dive on your health first to then determine, okay, well, what insurance company are we going to recommend? Yeah. So if your mother was under 40, we're pretty much going to get an exclusion and it's going to have an impact on your cover. Yeah. Between 40 and 50, there are some that will offer no exclusions. Most will still, have an impact on the cover. Some will offer exclusions or a loading, but generally speaking, we like to always pay more. That's our recommendation. If there is family history, we always prefer to tell the client to pay more for it. If they have that option, we'll recommend the loaded premium. And then there are some that, even up to age 65, a diagnosis in the family younger than 65, it will have an impact on the cover. Yeah. And so, it's really important to make sure that we are looking at which insurer we're recommending based on that family history. Yeah.
And just as an example, I had a client last year who came to me because she was in her early 40s. She'd had 2 friends in the previous 12 months diagnosed with cancer, and her mum had also had cancer. So she was really kind of strong on getting these insurances sorted out so that she could look after herself. She was single. She wanted to make sure that she had that financial backup if anything were to happen. And I made a post about this on LinkedIn, guys, so follow me on LinkedIn. Great information on there. But in that post, kind of what I did is I shared the outcomes that we got from the different insurance companies. So insurance company 1 and 2, they were going to put an exclusion on her trauma insurance for breast cancer. Insurer 2 was going to put an exclusion on trauma as well as TPD and income protection cover, so all 3 of those. Insurance company number 4, they did exactly what you're talking about. They said they could either put an exclusion on TPD, trauma and income protection, or they could put a 50% loading, meaning she'd pay 50% more for those covers. However, insurance 5 and 6 came through and said they would offer standard rates, so they actually wouldn't place an exclusion or a loading. She'd be fully covered if she were to be diagnosed with breast cancer. So that just shows the importance of those pre-assessments and the importance of going through an advisor. If we had just gone with whichever insurer was cheaper or whichever insurer provided cover to her super fund, she may have not been paid out in the event of a breast cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's why we're big believers in doing all this work and it actually takes longer for our clients to get insured than the average bear. Who is getting insurance. So because we do that deep dive, we want to make sure that every individual is their own special butterfly, that we are preparing the insurance recommendation based on these things, because it does have a massive impact. And it's not even this simple. It's not like, well, why wouldn't we just go with insurer 5 and 6 for all of these scenarios? Well, the client may have a back concern that insurer 5 may put a back exclusion on and insurer 1 wouldn't. And then there's always this like a crazy amount of research going, we make an assessment and we go, we think we'd prefer, like this client, it was really important to be covered for breast cancer. So, okay, let's go with the insurer that will put the back exclusion on because the breast cancer cover is more important to this client.
Yeah.
But we'll let them know, hey, insurer 1's not going to put a back exclusion on. So you can choose that if, after we go through the education process, because the client may determine that actually covering my back is probably more important, even though this has freaked me out, and it's important. Covering my back's actually better, so let's go with insurer 1. Or the premium on insurer 1 and including the back is more important, because that has a factor. Like there's about 1 million factors in our job, and we've got to balance all these things.
Exactly. Yeah.
So talk about any cancer on the individual who's getting going through an application. Like, what does that look like if I've had cancer, or if there's been a breast lump?
Yeah. So family history isn't always the case when we're looking at this. There are other factors that can impact whether or not you're going to end up with an exclusion for breast cancer. So lumps on the breast is a common one. One thing I've seen a lot in the last couple of years is women coming in who've had a fibroadenoma, which is a lump in the breast. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn into cancer, but what you might find is that doctors might want to check that every 12 months or every 3 years, just to check to make sure that hasn't grown in size or moved or become suspicious. So we actually do see a lot of the time breast cancer being excluded for fibroadenomas. Simple fibroadenomas, not so much. If you've got a complex one, then that does increase your chance of being excluded for breast cancer, which can be confusing for a lot of women because the doctors have told them this isn't breast cancer and it's probably never going to be breast cancer. But it goes back to what we were talking about before. The insurer can't change their mind if that does become breast cancer. So they will usually err on the side of caution there.
And we touched on it a little bit earlier actually about the age of the applicant, because the younger you are, sometimes the more conservative the insurer is. So if you are an applicant and you're 55 and you've had family history where, your mum was, 60, then the insurer may go, well, you're already 55. And so if you haven't gotten it yet, the likelihood of you getting it in the future in the time of which you're covered for is less. But if you're 25 or 30, well, we're covering you for the next 35 years or more. So we are going to be more conservative. So sometimes the age in which you apply for, the younger, the worse it is, because you haven't been old enough to potentially pick up any of these concerns when it comes to a family history concern.
Exactly, yeah. Probably the other thing as well people will ask about is if they have I think they call it the BRCA gene, which means you do have potentially an increased likelihood of that developing into cancer. I would say that's probably less of a concern in our experience, because if you have that gene, there is a chance that you've got it in your family history. As I said, it's really family history that's the biggest determinator of if you're going to be excluded. But if you do have that gene, I do believe there is an increased risk of having the breast cancer exclusion. But probably my question for you, Phil, you're probably more on top of this than me. There is a lot of talk about genetic history and discrimination when it comes to insurance, and potentially that being eased off a little bit. What's the latest there?
So all right, my recommendation is if any doctor has told you to get a test to see if you have any health markers, then it has to be disclosed at application stage. If you are just proactive about your health and you want to get your own test, get insurance before you do it. So, because you're not going to lie on your application, because the application will ask, has any specialist or doctor recommended a genetic test, and you say no because a doctor hasn't done it. So, but if a good example, one of my good friends, he's found out he's got a heart issue, and he's telling his siblings, go and get a genetic test, see if you have potentially a genetic disposition for this. And I just said to him, tell them all to get insurance, because a doctor hasn't told them to do it. You have, great, but that won't impact it. So if you're thinking, I want to get a genetic test, I want to be really proactive about my health, get insurance first. That's my number one recommendation. If a doctor's told you to do it, you'll have to it'll have to be considered in the application, because there's a reason a doctor's told you to do it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to genetic testing, there are talks about how do we not have it impact insurance applications, because it does impact insurance applications. And so the latest is the Minister for Financial Services, I believe Stephen Jones, did an announcement that they're going to think about doing something about
Announcing that they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he's retired, or he's retiring before the next election anyway, so he won't be doing anything to do with it. But so the latest is there was an announcement about thinking about doing something about it.
Okay.
So in all true government style, nothing much is happening. But at the end of the day, the insurance companies, they have to assess risk. Genetic test is a part of that assessment. And so currently there are some really small exemptions, but we can do a deep dive about genetic testing another time.
Definitely.
All right. So what if you have had breast cancer in the past? Like, how will that impact an insurance application?
Yeah, so that does make things a bit harder. It can be challenging to get some insurances when you've had cancer already in the past. So often it will rule out trauma insurance, just because a huge percentage of trauma claims are for cancer. And unfortunately, most insurers, or even all, don't have the ability to just scope out cancer from that and reduce your premiums accordingly. So often
there is some things like the reason why they don't do it is because they talk about comorbidity factors. So, if you've had breast cancer, and if you've gone through any treatment, chemo or anything like that, then that will increase the risk of other health issues. Yes. And so there's like the comorbidity issues when it comes to insurance, where the underwriter will say, well, we don't actually know if this has had a significant negative impact on your overall health, so we're going to just not offer trauma, and can lead to more difficult applications. Sometimes they'll offer just life insurance only with a significant loading. Sometimes they may decline all of it outright, depending on how far away from remission you are.
Yeah, so for example, at the moment I'm working with a female client who has had bowel cancer in the past, and she's coming up to 10 years since being in remission. So we actually do have a few options for her. We're getting life insurance, total and permanent disability cover, and income protection insurance, all with a loading that can be removed once it's been 10 years. And once it's been 10 years, they can also potentially look at trauma insurance as well. Not right now, but they said that they could look at doing that in the future.
And were there any outcomes from other insurers that were harsher?
Absolutely. So it was only three insurance companies that had kind of given that assessment. Other insurers were saying, no cover at all, or just a bit of life insurance with a 200% loading.
Yeah, no bueno.
No bueno. It can be very different depending on the insurance company. And that would apply also for breast cancer. So we would just be looking at, how long have you been in remission? What was the severity of the cancer? What was the rating? And what do the insurers want to do with that? Yeah,
cool. So what happens if someone is worried about being excluded or like having an increased likelihood? Like what are we doing about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've had someone in the family suffer from breast cancer, of course, that's going to be top of mind for you, and you're going to want to be covered for that. Again, it depends on the insurance company. What I say to a lot of clients who do end up with a breast cancer exclusion on trauma cover is, understandably, they can be upset about that. One thing I'd like to remind them is often you can still be insured. Often that exclusion just applies to the trauma cover. So income protection, if you were off work for an extended period of time because of breast cancer, you've still got that income protection, total and permanent disability. Life cover, I believe Phil never has exclusions, or at least I've never seen an exclusion on life cover. So
they'll load it or
they'll load it. Yeah, so you're still covered under that. But 100%, it can be really challenging. Often the things that we are most concerned about claiming on are the things that we're most likely to claim on. And that's just the irony of insurance.
Get insurance when you're young, healthy, and no issues. That's really the big answer. But.
Exactly. But just reach out. I know it can be really scary, and you don't want to see an outcome that you're not hoping for, but just reach out to an advisor, and a good understanding advisor will go through all of that with you, look at all your options quite exhaustively, and chat to you about that.
And our process process is we do heaps of work up front. It does take time and investment in terms of how do we actually get this. But we'll talk about the likely outcomes. Now, we're not the insurance provider. We're not going to actually offer this cover, but we'll, based on all our research, and we show all our research, this is the likely outcome. You're going to get an exclusion for this, or you're going to get loaded for this. Now, are you okay with that? Before we go to the insurance provider and go through an application and waste your time as a client and doing that whole body of work, try and giving the outcome up front as best as we can, just so then people can go, well, do I actually want it? Do I need it? All of these things.
Exactly. One thing I'll also mention as well here, Phil, to avoid surprises for people who go through this process, what you might find is if you're excluded for breast cancer, you're often also excluded for ovarian cancer. So they kind of treat them quite similarly. So everything we've talked about here with breast cancer probably applies also to ovarian cancer, family history. And the reason for that is there is, I think, a bit of a comorbidity there. If you have breast cancer in your family history, you're also more likely to experience ovarian cancer. Not to scare anyone, that's just what the insurers say. So it's often inclusive of both. Yeah,
and again, just a reminder, we're not doctors. If a doctor's coming on here and telling me that we're wrong, great, we probably are. We'll tell you what the insurers assess it
We know about insurance and not much else. So.
And we know about the health impacts on insurance, but that's about it. We don't understand why, but we just understand that's what they do.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk about cervical cancer. So we'll just talk about like the prevalence about it, but we'll just really talk about like the family history and the personal experience with cervical cancer. I think we can basically lump into the breast cancer type of thing. Really, the thing that I want to kind of really deep dive into is getting like a HPV positive. How does that impact it? Now, do you know what? I know HPV, and I've said it and read it and talked about it a lot. What does it stand for? Do you know?
This is really embarrassing. Every time I see HPV, I think human papillomavirus.
Okay.
And that's not what it is. Nothing to do with pavlova.
Pavlova?
Nothing to do with pavlova.
It's because you're a Kiwi.
Maybe. So it's human papillomavirus, I'm pretty sure. So cervical cancer, it's a cancer that starts in the cervix. It's actually not too common anymore. So it's actually quite rare. And that's because of the cervical screening test program that we have in Australia. So every woman over the age of, I think, 25 should be getting a pap smear every 5 years. And that can pick up on issues.
Unless you're my wife and you kick the can down the road for so long and feel guilty the whole time, and I keep telling her to get it. She just recently got it, finally.
Oh, good.
I'm like, get it. I don't want you to have cancer. What are you doing, you peanut?
I totally get it, though. It's an uncomfortable
100%.
Procedure.
I would not be doing it.
And you don't want to know what the outcome is if it's bad. So.
I know, I empathize totally, but like, let's deal with the outcome. Than just ignore it.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Anyway, that's my rant about my beautiful, amazing wife that is incredible about almost everything. Getting regular pap smears is not that superpower that she
We
holds.
can't do everything. We can't all be perfect.
That's it.
But because of those cervical screenings, most things can be picked up before they develop into cancer. So in terms of prevalence in Australia, about 900 women are diagnosed with cervical cancer every year, which isn't insignificant. And about 200 women die from cervical cancer each year. So primarily the biggest cause is exactly what we said, that HPV. So HPV types 16 and 18 are more risky and more likely to lead to cervical cancer from my understanding, but any type of HPV can lead to cervical cancer if it's left unchecked.
So how does it impact? So if I am negative, I'm all good.
All good. Yeah.
Fine.
Generally, you're fine. You wouldn't be looking at any exclusions. If you do have HPV, if that came up on your tests, what the insurers are likely to do is place an exclusion for cervical cancer on your trauma insurance primarily, but that is not permanent. So if in 12 months' time, so usually if you've had an abnormal result, they'll ask you to come back in 12 months.
Yep.
If in 12 months' time you go back and they say, actually, yep, it's all clear, that's sorted itself out, because it often does just sort itself out, you're back to the regular 5-year intervals, then the insurer can usually remove that exclusion.
Yeah.
If you go back, and I've seen this a couple of times, especially for older women, if you go back and they say, yep, actually it's all clear this year, but we want you to come back in 12 months again, just to check, these things can change, insurers will probably still keep that exclusion on. They want to wait until you're back to the 5-year.
Yeah, and doctors are, again, it's back to this, like, it's not necessarily about the actual outcome or the diagnosis or anything like that. Sometimes it's about the treatment plan and going, What is that? What is your overall treatment plan or symptoms with all health related things?
Exactly.
And so we've got a HPV positive. We'll get an exclusion, but as soon as we get a HPV negative test and we're back to 5-year pap smears, then we're all good. We can just basically just go back to the insurer and say, hey, we got a negative test and a negative good test. Then we can just get that exclusion removed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So.
And then a question I have is in 5 years' time, if you get a positive again, do we have to tell the insurance company?
No. So once you've got your insurance in place and that's been underwritten and you're covered, you don't need to tell the insurance company anything about your health unless you're making a claim. So no, if that changes in the future, that's the risk that the insurance company takes on, and you're still covered.
Amazing. Is there anything else about cervical cancer that we haven't touched on yet?
No, I think I would just say don't worry if you've had a pap smear and it's come back with abnormal changes or HPV. It's not the end of the world. Again, reach out and chat to your advisor. We've seen it all before. We can help you out. And in the future, if things change, we can help you there too.
And there's actually, talking about, I was just reminiscing about my rant about my wife. The insurers don't actually ask if you are getting regular pap smears. No. So there's no actual requirement for it. So if you're ignoring health issues... like my wife, Kate, love you. But if you're ignoring it, then they won't require you to do it to check if you've got a HPV positive or negative. And again, I guess because of the prevalence, it's not as big a concern from an insurer's point of view. But the insurers can't force you to go and be proactive about your health. Yeah. So they don't actually ask that question. So,
but this isn't to say...
Don't put it off, please. I will come and rant to you if you put it off.
Exactly. No one's safe.
Yeah, no, definitely no. Awesome. Well, this has been a great deep dive episode. We are going to do another one later today because we're late to a session. We're at our offsite in Torquay. And so we're going to be talking about like pregnancy complications, postpartum depression and anxiety, talking about low iron and PCOS. So watch the next video about that. But thank you so much for our deep dive.
Thank you so much for having me.